Welcome back everyone, it is Eric from Rare Candy, and today we're kicking off the first Paldea Evolved deck profile of the channel. And I think pretty appropriately we're going to start with the new Chien-Pao EX and Baxcalibur deck, which I think is far and away the most hyped new deck coming out of Paldea Evolved, for pretty good reason too. It's very similar to the old Blastoise Keldeo decks of the past. And before we get into the actual list, just a heads up, if you want some bonus Chien-Pao content after this video is done, I actually dropped a bonus article over on Patreon detailing some additional tech cards and alternate ways you can play this deck, so be sure to check that out. I will have a link down below in the description if you want to help support the channel and get some bonus content in the process. But with that being said, make sure to smack that like button to feed that YouTube algorithm, and let's jump into this list and see how it's going to look. So to kick things off, we have 3 copies of Frigibax in the deck, which of course we do need to evolve into Baxcalibur. But I do want to point out we are specifically playing this one. There are 2 different ones in Paldea Evolved, and even though I think you would initially be tempted to play the 70 HP one, I'm really valuing the 1 retreat cost of this one specifically. And as you can see, we're playing no copies of Arctibax, we're just playing the 3 Baxcalibur here. And this card is really the glue that holds this whole deck together. It has that ability where you get to attach as many water energies as you want from hand to any of your Pokemon. So not only do we need this just to get our Pokemon powered up, but also Chien-Pao does more damage for every water energy we have in play. So very important that we get this guy into play ASAP. And speaking of Chien-Pao, this is definitely going to be the deck's main attacker here. As long as it's in the active spot, you can search your deck for 2 water energies and put them into your hand. Typically, the big downside to this style of energy acceleration is that you are reliant on always having cards in your hand to be able to do so. And this ability really does help overcome that flaw, so long as you can get Chien-Pao into the active spot, of course. But Chien-Pao's attack also very good. You discard any number of water energy from your Pokemon in play, and it does 60 for each one you've discarded in this way. But between this ability and some item cards that we're playing in this list, as long as you have Baxcalibur in play, it's really not too hard to push this damage up to an amount to one-shot your opponent. But up next from there, we have a 1/1 Palkia V-Star in the deck. And I really do like Palkia for a number of different reasons here. I think the most obvious is definitely going to be its V-Star power that allows us to get 3 water energy from discard onto our water Pokemon in any way that we like. So effectively, whenever you activate this, it's a plus 180 damage for your Chien-Paos at any given point. But honestly, I really do like Palkia's attack as well, the 60 plus 20 for every bench Pokemon both players have. So this is just a nice kind of stable, low energy commitment attack that you can just sort of keep putting on pressure with, whereas with Chien-Pao, despite it being very strong, you do have to always be discarding your energy every time you attack. But going on from there, we also have 1 copy of Kyogre in the deck. I believe this is the one from Crown Zenith, and we're mainly playing this one for its 2nd attack. For 3 water and a colorless, you return 3 water energy to your hand, and then you do 180 to one of your opponent's Pokemon. 180 actually isn't a bad number. This means we can pick off things like Lumineon V on our opponent's field, and the fact that you return energy to your hand is actually a good thing in this deck, because on the next turn, you can just use Baxcalibur to slap all the energy back down on your next attacker. From there, we have a copy of Radiant Greninja in the deck. Definitely makes sense for a deck like this. We can use that Concealed Card's ability to discard a water energy and draw 2. But also because we have the Baxcalibur, we can actually attack with Moonlight Shuriken from time to time, which is a pretty good attack, being able to do that double 90 snipe. Next up, we have a 1/1 Burrell line just for a little bit of extra draw power with that Industrious Incisors ability. We can, of course, refill our hand up to 5 cards. So like I mentioned, one of the issues these styles of decks have is the fact that you do need energy in hand, and Burrell certainly can help with that. But the reason I like Burrell in here is because I feel like this deck really gets hurt hard by decks that play like heavy Judges or heavy Ionos, especially once you factor in Path to the Peak, because this deck does sort of live and die by its ability to accelerate energy from hand. And if your opponent's just constantly resetting your hand in the late game, you're probably not going to be able to actually close out a game. We have a Manaphy to protect our bench from attacks. And then to round out our Pokemon, we actually have 1 copy of Lumineon V to be able to, of course, search a supporter out of our deck whenever we bench it from hand. And Lumineon actually isn't a bad attacker in this deck. It does have the Aqua Return attack, does 120, and you shuffle it back into your deck. Much like with the Kyogre, Lumineon gives you a way to put damage on the board and also preserve your energy in the process, especially if you're going against like a single prize deck. You don't really want to be discarding your energy to just take a single prize. You rather just smack them with an energy efficient attack like that and then just keep all of that energy for a later point. But getting into our trainer cards here, we have 4 copies of Irida, definitely our preferred supporter of the deck, because of course we get to search our deck for a water Pokemon and an item and put them into our hand. So this is great in the early game to grab things like Battle VIP Pass and some of our basics to get set up. But of course, on maybe turn 2 when we need our Baxcalibur, we can play Irida to grab Baxcalibur plus Rare Candy to be able to complete the evolution line and start being able to attack. And even though Irida doesn't allow us to see a ton of cards, between the ability on Chien-Pao and the ability on Burrell, we can sort of offset that lack of draw power. Next up, we have our 2 copies of Professor's Research to just discard our hand and draw 7. And following that up, we have 2 of the new Iono supporter. Very powerful new supporter that we're getting here. Both players shuffle their hands, put them at the bottom of their deck, and then they draw cards equal to the amount of prizes they have remaining. So obviously in the late game, we can use this to disrupt our opponent's hand size, or if we don't want to discard our hand with a research, we can always play this just to help us get set up in the early game too. And to round out our supporter cards, just 2 copies of Boss's Orders. Even though this is a lower count compared to some decks out there, you do have to remember we also do have cards like the Kyogre and Radiant Greninja to be able to snipe the bench from time to time as well, sometimes not even needing a boss in the process. For our stadium card of choice, we have kind of an obscure one. That's going to be Skaters Park. This card up until now really hasn't been that great, but I think really does work well with a deck like this because whenever you discard energy to retreat a Pokemon, it actually goes back into your hand instead. So if we have this in play, we can maybe promote a Chien-Pao EX, use that ability to grab some more energy, accelerate some of that, and then whenever we retreat, we get that energy back and can slam it back down on our next attacker. Next up, we have a reprint of a fan favorite card of the past. That's going to be Superior Energy Retrieval. This card saw a ton of play back in the day in the old Blastoise Keldeo decks, and it's going to be no different for a deck like this too, because you discard 2 cards from your hand and get 4 basic energies from your discard pile back into your hand. So with Chien-Pao needing to discard anywhere between 5 and 6 energy to take these big one-hit KOs, it's not going to be hard to recharge it for a follow-up attack on the next turn. And our other recovery card of the deck is going to be another reprint. That's going to be Super Odd, a card I am really excited for to have back in the format here. You shuffle up to 3 of any combination of Pokemon and basic energy from your discard pile back into your deck. Next up, 4 copies of Battle VIP Pass. We're definitely a deck that wants a full bench at pretty much most points during the game. You search your deck for 2 basics, put them on your bench, but of course it does come at the downside of only being able to be played on your first turn. And also because we're playing the Irida, it's going to be so easy to actually find this on the turns that we want them. But that being said, we're still playing 3 copies of Nest Ball in the deck just to search a basic Pokemon, put it onto our bench. And we also have a copy of Hisuian Heavy Ball as well, where we can get a basic Pokemon out of our prize cards, put it into our hand, and then replace that card with the Heavy Ball. It's not a card that every deck plays, but because we play so many different one-of Pokemon, and the fact that we have Irida to find this out means I think it's a pretty worthwhile inclusion here. And then from there, we have 3 copies of Ultra Ball to round out our Pokemon search cards, where, like Superior Energy Retrieval, we discard 2 cards from our hand, but of course with this one, we get a Pokemon out of deck instead. We have 3 copies of Rare Candy to be able to evolve into our Baxcaliburs. And while I think normally this would be a card I would want 4 of in a deck like this, the fact that we have Irida to be able to find this whenever we need it means we effectively have, like 7 outs to the card at any given point. So I think the 3 count is going to work just fine here. We have a copy of Switch in the deck. So of course, if we don't yet have Skaters Park in play, we don't have to actually discard our energy when retreating. And also this is kind of like a pseudo energy search card as well, because as long as we have Chien-Pao in play, if we switch to Chien-Pao, we get 2 energies out of our deck. Similarly, we also have the 1 copy of Escape Rope as well. So same thing as Switch, but of course our opponent also is forced to switch. And for our last trainer card of the deck, we have a copy of Lost Vacuum. I wanted a way to bump stadiums that was able to be searched out by Irida, because if our opponent has something like a Path to the Peak in play, I want to be able to easily bump that out of play on the exact turns that we need to. And then to round out our deck list here, we have 10 copies of Basic Water Energy, which honestly might look a little bit weird at a glance because we do need so much energy with our Chien-Pao's attacks. But you do have to remember we do have those Superior Energy Retrievals to be able to get 4 energies back every time we attack. And we also do have the Super Rod and the Origin Palkia, so I think 10 is kind of like the perfect sweet spot I've found so far. I can maybe see an argument for 11 maybe, but I don't think we need like 14, 15, 16 energy or anything sort of like that. But that's where I'm at right now with the Chien-Pao Baxcalibur deck. Players who are fans of decks of the past, like the old Blastoise decks or even the old Emboar decks, are going to feel right at home with something like this. So who knows, maybe this will be the return of these old Blastoise style decks. But I definitely want to hear what you guys are thinking. What do you think about this list that we have today? Are there any cards that you would change? How good do you think the new Chien-Pao deck is going to be? Let me know your full thoughts down below in the comment section. But of course, guys, if you did enjoy today's content, as always, remember to leave a like on the video. Or if you're feeling a little extra generous and want to take that support to the next level, possible. You can also become a patron at patreon.com/rarecandytcg or pick up some merch at rarecandytcg.com. But as always, thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.